The people making Monaco take the mic. I'm Nancy Heslin, and welcome to Monaco Info, the podcast. Our guest today is regarded as one of the greatest female long-distance runners of all time. She held the women's world marathon record for 16 years and is a four-time Olympian representing Britain. As a BBC pundit, she covers every major athletics event on the planet, and she's also the founder of Families on Track. This Monaco resident has a few surprises up her sleeve too. She designs tote bags for athletes, and she speaks French at home with her two children. Welcome, Paula Radcliffe. Paula, I'm delighted that you are the first woman to come on as a guest for the Monaco Info podcast series in English. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
But I think that you could probably do this podcast in French. You're quite fluent, no?
Yeah, I studied French and German with economics at university. And then as part of my year abroad, I chose to go and work for 5 months in Germany to get enough money together to go and stay at the French National High Altitude Training Camp in the Pyrenees in Formes in France.
Oh, wow.
And then I fell in love with France and eventually got a training base down there. And then later on in my career, we were able to make the move to Monaco. Technically at that time, just to stay through the duration of my career, but we loved it here. So we stayed here. The children were born here. They've grown up. For them, it's their home.
But I mean, are people shocked when they hear how fluent you are?
Sometimes. I mean, people that know me know that I can speak French. I think because I'm in the media, and I'm mostly speaking English in the media, people that don't know me will be surprised if I suddenly speak French. The Paris Olympic Games this summer was a good example because we were in France. I was conversing with pretty much everybody around me, apart from when we were working in French. And yeah, that surprised some people in the English team.
Have you ever had, speaking French, have you ever been caught in the language? Like sometimes, because either two things can happen for expats that live here. Either the person that's speaking French to you just starts speaking English, which is frustrating because you're here to speak French. That's what we're all doing. Or they start thinking that you're so fluent that they just speak so fast, or they start using vocabulary and you're like, what? Have you ever had any mix-ups in your French?
The worst mix-up that I had was while commentating.
Oh.
And I was commentating for the BBC in English at the World Athletics Championships in Eugene in America. So there was no reason for me to be thinking in French. And I always say that's a good sign when you're comfortable with the language, when you start to think in the French. But I think what I did was I pronounced a French athlete's name with a French intonation and then carried on in French.
No.
And the entire team just looked at me and I could see them thinking, what are you doing? We're going out in England. You're speaking French. Why? I realized as soon as I kind of got 3 or 4, 5 words in and then had to apologize and pull it back.
Wow. But that does happen as soon as you start. Your brain just switches, which is a good sign. Why did you make the decision to speak French at home with your two kids? So you have your husband, Gary, and your kids, Isla and Raphael. Why did you make that decision for you to speak French with them at home?
I think very much because we were living in a French-speaking country. They were going to start school, start crèche, start maternelle in a French-speaking country. And so I wanted them to be as comfortable and to have an advantage that I didn't have growing up, and that so many of the kids here growing up in the Principality, growing up in France in general, have that advantage of absorbing the language like a sponge. So they don't feel like they're learning something. They just pick it up. And I wanted to be able to give them every chance of doing that.
Do you speak German to them as well?
Now they both chose German as their next language at school. I think under the proviso that I could help them with it. The problem is my daughter doesn't really like mum helping her. So that didn't really work out. I do it a lot more with my son, trying to help him to learn it. But the obstacle we've hit there is they've never had to learn a language by writing it down, as I had to at school. So we fight all the time. I'm like, you have to write it down. And they say, no, I don't have to write it down. I just learned French just growing up. I said, but you're not buried in the language, whereas you were growing up, and that's why you were able to learn it so easily.
Can I ask why German for them? Like, what do they see that as an asset of a language?
I think it probably was principally because I spoke the language. And certainly for my daughter, Isla, she had gone through some health struggles that we'll talk about later. But we were trying to make it as easy as possible for her with that other language. It's a tough school system, and any support that I could give them, I think I wanted to make sure with that. My son did really think about Italian, which would have helped him living much closer. I think at the time we had just come back from being at the European Championships in Munich. And so he had enjoyed speaking German there. And I think that was one of the reasons that they chose
Well, it's
it.
something different too. I mean, there's so much Italian here, you can pick it up a little bit. I know a lot of moms in the community here have, they struggle a little bit with their kids who are growing up bilingual. And not just in Monaco, but like in the south of France, there's lots of groups that talk about this issue, is that the kids end up having a stronger French language than they do the maternal English language. How do you deal with that? Like, do you feel like your kids are equal in their competence with both languages, and when they go on to university that they're strong in English?
I feel that they are competent in both languages orally. I still would say that both of my children are slightly more comfortable written in English, which is strange because they've learned the French from growing up. And I think it's probably the fact that in English it's easier to not make grammatical mistakes in French written, particularly when you've learned it as a French person growing up. It's much harder grammatically to get all of those past participles correct, whether it's an infinitive or whether it's an imparfait, and it's more difficult because orally it sounds the same. In English, we don't really have that. So I think they're pretty good in both, and that balance is there. And the really interesting thing is if they speak French, the French people will think they're native, and if they speak English, the English people will think they're native. And so that's, I think, the best test. There's no trace of an accent because they've grown up with at home in either. And they will mock me for my accent, and I don't think my accent's that bad.
No, I've heard you speak. You're really, really good in both your accent and your ability to communicate in a second language. What was childhood like for you? Obviously, you're telling me that you didn't learn a language as a young kid, as a young child. But what was your childhood like? Was it completely a million miles away from what your kids are experiencing?
Yes and no. I think a lot of the lessons, a lot of the fun that I had with my parents, I really try to pass on to my kids because I think I had a brilliant childhood. My grandparents and my parents were probably a little bit ahead of their time in terms of the fact that when I was 6 months old, I went camping across the continent, and I carried on doing that from when I was about 6. I think that gap, the first time we went with my grandparents and we were camping through France, and we went and visited some of the places that my grandfather had been stationed during the war. We visited all of the Normandy area as well. And then from when I was about 6, every one of our summer holidays would be in Europe, and the majority of those were in France. So that was undoubtedly where my love for France was born, and for the French language, for the French culture. I can remember being sent to the camp shop when I was about 7 or 8 for a canister of gas.
So explain what that is for people that maybe don't have that camping experience, and how proud you can feel as a young person having responsibility to go independently.
Well, how proud and also how scared sometimes. But the camp shop is basically the marché or the supermarché that is in the campsite. And so it basically carries everything that you would need for your camping trip, including the gas canisters for the cooking stove. And we'd run out. And so my mum, who was probably busy trying to cook the dinner, had said to me, okay, go along. Here's the money. Can you go along and get a replacement gas canister? Which with an 8-year-old's French or whatever was a little bit daunting. But I think that kind of independence that they gave me, and that way of, we're teaching you something, but you don't really know that we're teaching you something because you're just very proud that we're trusting you to go and do this.
Well, the fact you remember it after all these years tells me that
it worked.
Stuck with you. So let's talk a little bit about your sort of career, your young career as a runner, because I read something. First of all, I read something on Wikipedia and it made me realize, do people that are accomplished athletes like yourself or celebrities or stars or anyone that has a Wikipedia page, do you ever check Wikipedia, Paula Radcliffe, to see what is written and is it factually correct?
I don't. I think my kids might have done it to have a laugh, and I'm not sure they would actually tell me if it wasn't correct. I know that you can do, and I think there probably are people that do. To be honest, I haven't checked my Wikipedia page. There is
Okay.
like a thing from Who's Who,
Yeah.
and they send you that every year to check it.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I read on Wikipedia, so I'll ask you if this is true. When you were 12 years old, you had joined the Bedford and County Athletics Club in the UK. So this is 1986. And your first race at a national level, there were 600 girls competing. You came 299 out of 600. But the next year in 1987, you finished fourth.
Yes, but you have to understand the age group system as well. So you have 2 years in each age group. So the first one, I was a first year minor girl, which is under 13, which is the same as Benjamin in France. And then this following year, I was a year older. And there is a really big
Okay.
story to that. So there were 605 girls in those national championships, under 13 girls that year. And I finished 299th. And my dad gave me a massive big hug and said, wow, you were in the first half. That was really, really good. And so I came away from that thinking, wow, I've come in the first half in the country. And then after that, my coach approached my mum and he said to my mum, I want to try and win the national championships as a team in the under 13 category with the group of girls that I have next year. I want Paula to be a part of that group. Can she please come to training twice a week instead of once a week? And my mum turned around and said, why are you asking me? You need to ask her. It's her sport. So he came to me, and the fact that he thought I was good enough to get in the first four for Bedford, which is the scoring team, and believed in me enough that I could do that was enough for me to drop judo and go to athletics
Judo?
twice a week. Yeah, I did judo up to 12.
What age did you start judo?
I started it probably about 6 or 7, maybe a little bit older.
Because these are two very different sports. And you started running at what age? Do you remember the first time you ever went for a run?
No, I don't remember because I always just remember running. But I remember the first time that I joined a club. And because I had a friend at school that I used to run around with in the playground, and she was a year older than me, and she was already in the athletics club, and I had to wait until I was 9 to join. And I used to run with my dad and join in, and he'd promised me, as soon as you're old enough, I'll take you down and I'll sign you up. So 17th of December came, we went down and we signed up for Frodsham Harriers.
Because your dad was an amateur runner, or he ran
Yeah.
frequently?
Yeah, so my dad ran fairly well in school, then gave it up at university, and then fast forward till he met my mum, and they were going to have kids, and my mum said, right, I'm pregnant, you need to give up smoking. He gave up smoking, put on a lot of weight, and then went back to running to lose the weight. And so then he kind of rediscovered the love that he'd had as a teenager for running. And that was right in the 1980s when the running boom was really starting, certainly in the UK, with the London Marathon coming from strength to strength. So he was part of those groups. I mean, it started in 81. I think he did it in 83, 84, 85, or 83, 85, 86. But he ran the London Marathon 3 or 4 times.
Did you go to see him, or did you see women running, or anything that inspired you during that time?
I remember really strongly the smell of deep heat on the start line in Blackheath, and it was just overpowering. And as a kid,
what does that smell
deep
like?
heat, it's kind of like menthol.
Oh, it's
but
like a cream you put
it's
on.
a spray that they
Oh,
put
okay.
on to warm up the muscles. And
Called
it's a
deep
bit,
heat.
yeah, because it causes a deep heat, I guess, within the muscle. But it's a really strong smell and an overpowering smell for a kid. But I just remember being totally in awe of the atmosphere, the camaraderie, the spirit that took over the City of London for this race, and it's grown so much now. And I remember waiting beside the road for my dad to come by, because we would have a little carton of orange juice and a small Mars bar that we would hand him, because then there weren't really refreshments and fuel handed out en route so much. So we had those and we're waiting for him to come by. And I saw Ingrid Christensen run past en route to setting a world record in the women's marathon that day. And to me, she seemed so fast, so powerful, so far ahead of my dad. And I was just captivated. And I was like, one day I want to come back and run as well as she's doing and run as strongly as she is doing. And then my dad came, and my dad stopped to open his carton of drink and undo the Mars bar. And I said, what are you doing? You need to do that while you're running along. All these people are going past you. And he said, no, it doesn't matter. It's more important that I stop and I fuel and I just carry on.
Can you tell people who Ingrid was, or how you saw her? How did you even know who she was at that time?
I don't think I did know who she was at that time. I think I probably asked my dad a lot of questions about it afterwards. But Ingrid Christensen was, well, I refer to her as one of the first ladies of the marathon. And of distance running in general. So she was a Norwegian runner, and she held the world record at one time for the 10,000 meters on the track and for the women's marathon. And that 10,000 meter record on the track stood as a European record until I broke it in 2002. She was a huge, huge idol for me, and I really, really looked up to the way that she ran the races. I think going back to the first time that I just saw her dominate that, but she used to run in these white gloves, and she basically just used to grind down the opposition and just make it hard from the start. And so she was a huge, huge inspiration. And then I was very lucky. She won the London Marathon a lot of times. And when I committed to running the London Marathon, I was able to sit down with her and really get to pick her brains. And she gave me a lot of great advice about the marathon.
You know, obviously the gender issue is a big topic right now and what women are trying to get through. But when you look at sports, you often think, well, there's the men category and the women's category. What were these women really accomplishing that maybe if you didn't follow marathon or long distance running, that maybe we didn't understand? Like, really, what did they accomplish?
A lot of things. I mean, if we look back, I think it was, I might get some of these dates wrong, but I think it was 1924, the last time that distance events were in the marathon, even the Olympics, even the 800 meters. And so I think some of the women, when they finished, had collapsed on the floor and they'd said, oh, this isn't good enough. They're not strong enough. They can't do that. We see male and female athletes collapsing. It means you've given everything in the race. It's a good sign. But it was deemed that it wasn't something that women could do. So apparently we can carry children, but we can't run a marathon. Or that was the thinking then. And so the first pioneers of women's marathon running had to actually enter under a male name and to run disguised in order to be able to do that. And so people like Catherine Switzer, who was famously pulled off and manhandled off the Boston Marathon course, Bobby Gibb did the same. They entered as a male in order to be able to prove that, yes, women can do the marathon.
The photos of that time, if you can ever see them online, are just unbelievable.
And then there's the women
trying
who
to pull
sat
off the course
as well in New York. So they had to sit on the start line in New York, because even though by then women had the right to run the marathon, they were told that they would have to go off after the men's race so that they were out of the way. And they couldn't go in front and have it highlighted as we do now. So we have many separate male and female races now. But that's in order to highlight it. This was in order to hide them away and pretend that they're not really, we're letting them run, but we're not really putting a spotlight on it. So they sat down on the start line and refused to move until they were allowed to go with the rest of the race, which was a huge thing for women, that these women campaigned for something that now so many of us take for granted. The fact that we can just take part in any race, and anything that men can do, we can also do.
But is running something that you can learn to do well, or do you think that people that are naturally gifted, they have some kind of talent that they can then build upon?
I think you have to have talent, but I think talent is a very general word. I think natural talent, where you can just walk out of the door and suddenly run phenomenally fast, very, very few people have that. So a lot of people within any sport just have a talent for applying themselves, for pushing themselves, for working hard. And I think particularly in distance events, particularly in the marathon, that talent there is kind of what you need. You have to love doing what you do to come through the difficult times, the tough times, the injuries. And you have to be able to hurt a little bit. And I think I am very lucky in that naturally I have quite a high pain threshold. So it's not that I'm being brave. Sometimes I just don't feel it. Sometimes I cut myself and I don't realize it.
Really? Well, when I interviewed you, I think it was maybe back in 2013, I remember you telling me once that you gave yourself 1 year after university to see if you could make it as a professional runner, and if not, you'd get a job. What did that mean? Because in the end, you went on to become a 3-time winner of the London Marathon, a 3-time winner of the New York Marathon, and you also won the Chicago Marathon. So was there ever a moment where you're thinking, okay, I want to run, but when you say become a professional runner, you still have to worry about money like everybody else?
Yeah, totally. And what I mean to give that some context, so I won the World Junior Cross Country Championships in Boston in 1992, in March of 1992. 1992, I left school with my A-levels and I was going away to university. So that was the first race where I really thought, hey, I'm good enough. I have a chance of making it as a professional athlete. And that's something that I really want to do. So I looked at it as a really good opportunity to give myself that time at university to build and to get stronger and to see if I could make it as a professional athlete representing Great Britain. And it certainly factored into my decisions. My daughter's deciding now her future and university applications. Mine were also centered around where's the best course, because I didn't want to let my running dictate my academic choices, but at the same time, the university that I would choose had to have the best course, but it had to be close enough to my coach that I could get together for training sessions. It had to have a good environment to be able to go out for runs and to enjoy that. So that's why I settled on Loughborough. And it was absolutely the best decision for me. Loughborough is in the middle of England, so it's in the Midlands, kind of between Nottingham and Leicester, and it's a great area. It's a really strong university for sport, if not the premier university for sport in the UK.
What were you studying then?
I was studying modern European studies.
Of course.
And as I said, I looked at the course. I looked at Cambridge University. I turned down Cambridge University because they wouldn't allow me to continue with 2 languages after the first year. They said you had to focus on one, and I wanted to do both. So I chose the course that I felt was the best for me there.
You are naturally competitive?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I'm naturally competitive. I'm not, how do I say? I'm mostly competitive with myself. So I want to walk away from something and say, that was the best that I could do. And I get very angry with myself if I don't feel I've given my best effort. So I'm not like, in everything that I do, I'm not super competitive. So if I kind of play a game of cards, I'm not going to have to win and push myself to do all of that. I will just do the best that I can, and if I don't, then I don't. I do get really angry if people don't try their hardest. So if we're playing group games and somebody doesn't give their full effort, I get really competitive then. But I'm not really competitive in everything that I do, but certainly in things that are important to me, then I'm competitive.
Because you would have had to really push yourself to get to the level you wanted. There was lots of people that wanted to also get into the Olympics in the same field that you did, I would imagine.
Yes, and I think it was more that I just enjoyed pushing myself just to see what I could do. I don't think I really thought about it as I'm trying to be better than them to get on the team.
It was your own path.
Yeah, I just looked at it and thought, that's what I have to do to get on the team. I need to run that time and I need to finish in the top 3 in the trial. And it was that simple.
How did you end up in the 1996 Olympics? Was your first?
My first Olympic Games, yeah.
How did you get to that point? Tell me what it feels like, because I imagine you have trials to get on the team. Mm-hmm. What does that involve?
Well, again, go back to 1992. And so we have the British trials for the Olympic Games, and they're held usually in Birmingham.
Are you invited to that? Or
no, you have to qualify for that. You have to run a time to qualify for that. And I had qualified that year. I was still a junior. I was focused on the World Junior Championships that year, which were held in South Korea in September. But I went to those trials in June, would have been June, July time. And I had just finished my A-levels. I'd basically studied really hard for my A-levels. And then I felt like I was free. I was done with school and I was going to really go and enjoy this race. and I ran a huge personal best, and I finished 4th in those trials by not very much. And I thought, oh, I nearly qualified for the Olympics, and it wasn't even one of my goals this year. And so I wasn't upset about it at all. I was just very excited by the fact that I had a chance. I watched those Olympic Games while I was training for the World Junior Championships, and it definitely became a goal for me to qualify the next time around. So in 1996, I was doing my finals at university. The event had changed because it was the 3,000 meters in 1992, and in 1995, the distance changed to 5,000 meters.
Do you know why?
To make equality, basically, because it was 3,000 meters for women and it was 5,000 meters for men. And there was no real reason for that other than that women hadn't been upped in distance when the men did.
And that appealed to you, the longer distance?
I think in the long term it did, but at that time, I think it was just that's what it is. I didn't think about whether it suited me or not because I didn't have a choice in it. It's what it was.
So I always think of you sort of as a superhuman runner. Like, I'll go for a run and I'm very slow. I often don't look at my watch. I just enjoy running, but it's not obviously a speed trial for me. Do you know when you go out and you run, if your legs feel good? Do you know if you're in a run that I think I'm going to break a record today? While you're running, not that you have it set in your mind, but once you set off and that speed and everything's just flowing well, can you feel that you're about to set a record?
Well, you can feel that you are ready. So some more things will have to fall into place, like the pacing, the weather, just things going according to plan on race day. But through that training cycle, you can feel that you're getting ready. And one of the parts that's the most key for me is when you warm up and then the gun goes and you start, and that first couple of 100 meters is the bit where you really feel if everything is, I say, clicking, if it's flowing, if it feels like it has done on the best training days, like everything that we work towards, and then you try and capitalize on it as much as possible.
So on the opposite side, what happens when you're going through all that and you know your body isn't cooperating or something doesn't feel right? How do you mentally push yourself to get through that race?
I think you just have to really, really focus, and it is about taking it to as simple a place as you possibly can. I'm just going to focus on one foot in front of the other and just find some monotony, some rhythm in that until I come through it. And a big part of the marathon race is accepting the fact that there are always points. Even if you are in world record shape and you're breaking the world record, you will still feel really rough at some parts in that race. And
we don't think that of people like
everybody shares that in the marathon. There will always be at least one, if not more than one, rough patch. And you just come through it the same way that you do in training, by using the techniques that you focus in training. And the only rider that I will give there is sometimes it just really isn't right and there's a bad injury, and then you really do have to listen to your body and stop, and nobody should push through that.
One of the things that still upsets me to this day is when I think about the 2004 Athens Olympic and the experience you had, not just the experience you had on the marathon course and having to pull out, but the way that you were treated by your country, by your press. What happened in Athens on the marathon race, around 32 kilometers?
Yes, but the scene was set before that, really.
So tell us what happened in 2004 in Athens.
So in 2004, I was going in as probably the overwhelming favourite in the women's marathon. I'd set the world record of 2:15:25 in April of the previous year, of 2003. Then I'd actually taken some time away from the marathon to make sure that I wasn't over racing, that I wasn't doing too much, to try and, I guess, wrap in cotton wool a little bit for those Olympic Games. Then what happened, I picked up a hernia in March of 2004. And so that kind of worried me.
Do?
It causes a lot of, it's basically a hole in your abdominal wall, in your groin. And it's then part of the intestine can start to come through. But because of the fact that the pelvic ring of muscles knows it's out of balance and it knows that there's a hole in there, there's a lot of balancing that goes on, and overcompensation from the hamstrings, from the adductors, from the glute muscles. And so that's how I picked it up, because I was getting a lot of pain around my glutes and the top of my hamstrings, top of my quads. And so that was a bit not really planned for. We went in for the surgery. I was back running within 5 days. It was all repaired.
Oh, wow.
It was actually, I was back a little bit too fast. And I still look back and I don't believe in regrets, because you can't go back and change it. But had that gone to plan, I would have gone and raced the World Cross Country. I would have taken my 2 to 3 weeks off, and I would have started getting ready for the Olympic Games. Looking back, what happened was I had the surgery earlier. I recovered from that. I rushed a little bit because I was feeling, things haven't quite gone perfectly. And I was ready a little bit too soon. And when you're in tip-top shape, it's hard to hold that. And so what might have happened was I picked up an injury, and it was a really weird injury. So instead of actually really tearing a muscle, I'd kind of had an intermuscular bleed. And so it had caused like a pocket of blood to be trapped between my quadricep muscle and my femur.
Oh.
And they didn't know what it was.
Painful.
And so it was painful after. So I could run once it was warm, but then afterwards it would really hurt to kind of extend my leg and to do the next run. And they couldn't really work out what it was. So we were treating the symptoms rather than finding the cause. And then we went into the Olympic Village, and by now the panic is really starting to rise. I was on a lot of anti-inflammatory medications to try and get rid of whatever it was. I had an MRI, and they saw the pocket of fluid, and we were probably about 5-6 days out from the Olympic marathon. So this would never have happened. Wow. Had it been any other race, I would have just said, okay, this isn't happening. I'm hurt. We need to figure it out. But it was the Olympic Games, and it was my best shot at winning a gold medal at the Olympic Games. So we had to try everything. And I can still remember the stress in the room in the Olympic Village when the British doctor had to go in blind because we couldn't find an ultrasound scan to use in time, and we had to go in quickly. And basically, with an empty syringe, draw out the blood from there. And then I had to have a cortisone injection, rest, and give it 48 hours, no running, and then go into the Olympic marathon.
So you go and you're at the start, you're having issues physically, and you know, okay, this is still my best shot. This is still my best shot at a gold medal for the Olympics.
It was my best shot so far.
So far.
Probably by then it was a little bit less. Maybe I had a better shot in Sydney, but I was beaten by 3 better people.
But sorry, for 2004.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That particular Olympics, you're there, you're thinking, I've got to do this race. I'm going to win. But you've gone through all this trauma, really, of physical stuff and trying to get it. What happens? You start running.
Well, what happened was in the days beforehand, I'd had the anti-inflammatory injections. I'd been under a huge amount of stress. I was taking the anti-inflammatory tablets as well. And basically my stomach, my intestine shut down. So I wasn't absorbing food. And anybody who runs the marathon knows the one thing you need is carbohydrate, is glycogen in your muscles to be able to get through the marathon. Otherwise, the human body gets to 20 miles and doesn't get much further. And so essentially that's what happened. In all the stress, I didn't say to anyone, hey, the food that I'm eating is basically coming out undigested. I didn't realize I wasn't absorbing it, because in my head I thought, I'm eating the food, I'm drinking the carbohydrate drinks, I'm preparing ready for this race. And the way the race panned out, and again, probably because of my competitive spirit, there was a bit of a break up a very long hill. I covered that, and I used my last reserves of energy. So off the top of that hill, I knew I didn't have anything left in my legs. And I kept saying it to myself, it's okay, it's downhill all the way. But I couldn't control my body. So I kept veering off to the side of the road. I wasn't really running in a straight line. And I was kind of scared. I'd never experienced that before. And so everything instinct-wise in my brain was saying, you're not going to finish this. And I stopped once, I made myself start again, and then I knew I wasn't going to get to the end of the race. And I was heartbroken with that. And basically I'd just run out. I'd hit the wall and I'd run out of energy in my body.
On top of your own heartbreak and disappointment, that is something you can only process individually as an athlete, I'm sure. And then there's the family and friends and coaches that you're also dealing with that are telling you it's okay, it's okay. But you then had to deal with the press at home calling you things like a quitter and a choker and a drama queen, all of these things, which to this day, Paula, I don't understand. And how did that make you feel?
It really affected me, and it is one of those moments in my life which certainly, when we say bad stuff happens and you become a stronger person, that's definitely one of those times. And at the time, I wouldn't have wished it on anyone, but now I know that a lot of my strength as a person came from that time, because I had to toughen up. I had to, first of all, get myself back in one piece, because that was the thing I was most scared of. What if I can't run at that level anymore? What if I've done permanent damage to my body by what happened? And so I had to answer those questions, and then I had to get back to running for myself. So I tried to block out a lot of those criticisms. And I think I'm never one to shy away from criticism if it's valid. And what really hurt there was that it wasn't valid. I was being accused of having quit when I didn't really have a choice. I wasn't going to be able to finish that race. And quitter is something I'm not. I know I'm not. I was accused of running for money, and that's why I couldn't do well in the Olympics, but I'd done well in the big city marathons. When one of the reasons I hadn't run any marathon prior to it since the world record was to make sure, or try and make sure, that the Olympics would go okay. So that one really hurt, because I knew it was so untrue.
Well, also, they're not saying it very nicely in the press. Like,
No.
we're using words very mildly, but the way they attacked you, and in only a way the British press can.
Yeah, I mean, I had people following me around. I had people phone my doctor's surgery and pretend to be me and ask for the results of a pregnancy test, which hadn't happened because I wasn't pregnant. But they were people trying to guess what had happened when I didn't even know really at that point. It took me a long time to piece it all together exactly what had happened. So I think there was a lot of disappointment in the nation. That's kind of a British thing that we do. We put all of our hopes onto someone, and then when that person doesn't come through, it's their fault, when they've tried their best.
But I've never understood that, because you're representing that same country with and anyone
it's
that
not
knows
everyone.
sports,
I had a lot of really nice support as well. I had some beautiful letters, a lot of support from people. I really found out where my friends were. Things were easier to put into perspective. And so, I had to learn, basically. And it was that run after one of those articles where I'd read something particularly hurtful, and I couldn't do my run because I was crying so much. Because I was hurt so much by the unfairness of what the journalist had written. And so I sat down, cried for a bit, and then I had a really hard talk with myself, and I said, okay, this is stupid, because they're now stopping me doing what I want to do and what makes me feel better. So that was the turning point for me in terms of accepting I'm not going to be able to please all the people all the time, but I am going to do what pleases me and what pleases the people close to me. And that's what matters. So that was a real turning point. I think before that, I might have said, it doesn't really bother me what people say, but it did deep inside. And it still always will on some level, but certainly after that point, it affected me a lot less.
But you went on to do 2 other Olympics after that, in 2008, 2012.
Well, 2012, I wasn't able to actually take part, but in 2008, yes, I did. But undoubtedly, my experience in 2004 affected 2008, because in 2008, I probably shouldn't have gone. I had a stress fracture in my femur bone. In, I think it was May, it was diagnosed of 2008.
Really close.
So I went to the Beijing Olympics off 10 days of running outside. I had been able to run on an anti-gravity treadmill. I'd been able to do a lot of cross training on elliptical machines and water running in the pool, but I hadn't been able to actually run. So I learned another lesson. I learned a lesson that you can't fake it in the marathon. However fit cardiovascularly wise you might be, you need to be used to the pounding. And I wasn't. So I just cramped up, and I was able to finish that race, but I wasn't able to do my fitness level justice at that point, because I hadn't built up the resilience in my legs. But still, for me, it was a victory to finish, because I had come through a lot of stuff, and maybe only my support team knew how much we'd come through or how little preparation we'd had. But off the back of Athens, where I had been called a quitter, I had to finish that race, even if I finished it on one leg. And I can remember at one point the doctor said to me, "We don't know if the fracture is fully healed yet."
And you ran?
And I said, "Well, how do you know?" "Well, we don't." I said, "Okay, but I'm going to get some warning, right? It's going to hurt before it would actually break." And they said, yeah. So I said, "Okay, I'll just do that then." But I had to sign a disclaimer to say that I was going to do that.
What is it like, honestly? I mean, there's so many Olympians that live in Monaco, and every time I kind of like want to get into their head, because I'm always, how do you manage like the sport and the finance of your life? Because I don't think when you're, especially years ago, when you're coming up as an athlete, that you're given a lot of information about also balancing your books. What was it like for you to switch from being the athlete to the commentator? Because you often are a pundit for BBC now. You did the Summer Olympics. Do you get nervous doing that? Oh, you do?
Oh, massively, massively. I mean, maybe
surprised.
that's right. I think it's, at the same time, it's a huge privilege because this is a sport I love. And this is a sport that I would be watching on television anyway. And now I get to have the best seat in the house because we have a very good seat to watch the events and to have the honor of conveying those performances to people at home watching. But it's not what I was trained to do. It's not what I grew up ever thinking I would be doing. And it's not something I was particularly good at in the beginning. It's definitely something that I've had to learn. And to learn a new skill in your 40s is hard. But at the same time, it's a great team. I sit alongside Steve Cram, another great commentator, Andrew Cotter, who commentates on all sports. And they and Brendan Foster, who I came in to replace in the beginning, have been hugely helpful to me in terms of just advice and
What
just
kind of
helping.
advice do they give you? What does a BBC person have to go through to be able to successfully comment?
Well, it's not so much the BBC as just
Anyone.
being able to convey that, and it is those obvious things.
Give me some advice, Paula.
But one of the things is really to imagine that it's not you watching at home, it's your grandma watching at home. So some people can't always understand the terms that we would use, so you have to really explain things clearly. My role is not to, at this moment, to be the best commentator. I'm very much still learning that skill. That would be for Steve. Mine is more to see into the minds of athletes and to think what they might be thinking at that point and to bring that in. So it's really about doing that. And then I mean, there's the obvious ones of pronouncing names and getting those right, where you have to be watching. Make sure that you're always watching what's actually going out at home, not what's happening in the arena, because it might switch and you might still be talking about the wrong thing. So those kind of lessons are things. But the hardest thing for me was adjusting to the fact that you have headphones on, and in those headphones there are a lot of people shouting and telling you things at the same time as you're trying to concentrate on the race. So learning to balance that and to balance the levels, I think, has been the hardest thing for me.
Do your kids think that you're cool because you're on TV? And
I mean, they would be the first person to tell me if I don't do something well, if I make a mistake. I don't think they've ever really talked about when they were little, they did think it was really cool to be able to come in and put the headphones on and to listen to what was going on and to do all that side of it.
Did you always want a family?
Yes.
Was that important to you?
That was probably a goal in my head. Before I even knew about making goals in my head, I just always saw myself having children, and it was always going to be a boy and a girl.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that if we look at your life, it looks quite perfect. You know, your husband was a former runner as well, and you have a boy and a girl. You live in Monaco, of all places. And so the world could look at you and say, you have a perfect life, Paula Radcliffe. But then in 2020, your world was turned upside down. Do you want to take us on a little tour of what happened to your family?
So, what happened to my family is that my daughter, Isla, was diagnosed with a malignant germ tumor on her
how old was
ovary
she?
at 13.
Mm-hmm.
So she was 13 and that was at the end of August, so right before the rentrée of 2020. I had lost my dad in April of 2020, and she had, Isla had, potentially started her periods around that time as well. But she was getting a lot of pain with it, a lot of also anxiety, to the point where I was almost on the verge of consulting a child psychologist because of the anxiety that was coming along. What she wasn't telling me was that she also felt a mass growing in her stomach. She started to do more abdominal exercises, and She had noticed that when she was swimming, because she would spend a lot of time swimming through the COVID times, they'd also got a trampoline. And on the trampoline, she said she kept wanting to go to the toilet. And I just gave her pelvic floor exercises because you don't think that there's a tumour growing inside your baby. And she couldn't hold her breath for as long when she was swimming underwater either. So there were some small signs. We went to the paediatrician. The paediatrician, Dr. Remidiani here in Monaco, was absolutely phenomenal. She felt the mass. We went for the ultrasound scan. The next day, we went straight from there to Lonval. The following day, we had an appointment at the Hemo-Oncology Pediatric Department in Larcher. And the next Wednesday, we were in all ready to start the first chemo stay. And I have never been more grateful for where I lived and the way that they reacted in the middle of a pandemic, because I know that sadly in other places, even in America, in the UK, things like that weren't picked up as quickly. And there was never any question that I could stay with Isla in the pediatrics oncology department there in Larcher. And there was never any question that the treatment wouldn't continue. Should we have picked up COVID? The only difficult time came before she had the surgery to remove the tumour. So we had 3 rounds of chemo, and they shrunk the tumour and essentially killed off the most part of it. And then they went in at Lonval to operate and to remove it. And there they did say if I was to pick up COVID in that time, I wouldn't be able to go with her and stay with her through the surgery. So we took the decision then to take my son Raphael out of school just for that month before, and just to kind of really make sure that I was able to be with her, because no one wants their child to have to fight cancer on their own, but definitely don't want them to go through the surgery on their own.
How did that impact you as a mom, as a family, when the word cancer is introduced? Because, I mean, obviously as a mom, you don't imagine your children going through that, but also she was just young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you cope with that?
I think you cope because you have to, and you become hugely, hugely grateful for the support staff and the support crew that you have around you in terms of your family, your friends. And it's sometimes little things, like one of my very good friends whose son was in the same class as my son, just saying, I've got this. If you're not there to do the pickup, or if you're not there to support through the homework, we've got this for the minute. You just need to focus on that, because that other sibling for a mum is a really difficult thing to manage. Obviously, you have to be with the one who needs you most, but you have to make sure the other one's okay as well. I had friends here who drove in the middle of a pandemic with pizza, homemade pizza, wrapped up in foil, to the hospital in Larcher, weren't able to bring it in, weren't able to see us, just because that was the one thing that Isla said she could eat that day. Aww. And so those kind of gestures really, really mean a lot to you. And I think the support of the medical staff, the doctors at Larcher, the pediatre here in Monaco, Dr. Mediani as well, I don't think we had it explained to us so well that obviously it's not great, and we knew it was going to be tough, but we never didn't see her coming through it. We never accepted that as not being a possibility. That was just what we were working towards. And even when it's really tough, I think she will say now that she didn't think about it. I mean, she actually recorded a podcast with some other cancer survivors. And one of those was a young woman who'd been in her 20s when she was diagnosed. And they asked them both what was the first thing that came into their head. And so Gemma said, well, I was really scared that I would die. And Isla looked at me and she said, does that make me really shallow? Because I was really scared I'd lose my hair. And I said, no, it's just the difference between a 13-year-old child who doesn't know what an ovary is when she was diagnosed. The doctor had to draw a diagram to really explain what it was. And an adult who has seen a bit more of the world and knows the bad things that can happen. Yeah. And I think it was we were lucky. It was, of everything that it could have been from the first scan, it was the best outcome in terms of the one that was the most treatable. So we knew that the odds were good from the beginning. And yeah, as I said, we just had great support and just took it one day at a time.
And the prognosis now?
She's good now. I think she is approaching 4 years from the time the tumour was removed, which tends to be getting through the they'll say you are in remission after that. And she gets regular checkups, and that's always a nervous time. But at the same time, it's a reassuring thing as well that they're checking and they're seeing that there's nothing more growing there and that everything's okay. So I think it has made her, well, it's shaped her as a person. It's made her a stronger, also more empathetic person. And she tends to not worry about the little teenage things as much. She still does. She's still a teenager. But she doesn't worry about those little fights and little dramas that seem so huge for a teenager now because she has that bigger perspective.
How do you bring up kids in Monaco where things like money and physical looks are so important? And I think they're important everywhere. I think that the way the world works and the generations now see through social media what they could have, what other people have, I think it's there. But we're a little compact country here. How do you raise your kids to have value in life and to know that you have a son and a daughter, and I can't say that looks don't matter one or more to the other because there's so much emphasis here. How do you get over that with them? How do you teach them?
I think the same as any parent does anywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how much money you have, where you live. You're essentially there to teach your children the values and the morals of life, and good morals and good values. And that's kind of something that you have to focus on. And sometimes it's maybe something that's harder to do when you are in a more privileged circumstance or when you have to be away at work all the time. So I think it is tough, and none of us know that we're doing a great job. But I think we do have to try and pass those teachings on, because the school is there to teach them like academic things. We're trying to teach them values and trying to be the best person that they can, to have respect for other people, respect for themselves, confidence in themselves. And
that can't be easy.
No, it's not easy. But at the same time, I really do believe that while it is a very privileged society, Monaco is actually a really good place to bring up a grounded, well-rounded teenager at the moment. And that sounds like a really strange statement to make, but you think about how many different nationalities you have here. My daughter is writing dissertations at the moment and analyses on the issues going on in Gaza, in Israel, on the Ukraine conflict. She has first-hand experience from people who have relations there, from people who have an understanding of that. You don't get that in many countries. If I think what's happening in the UK, they don't have that rounded view of the world and the problems of the world. So yes, we have very few problems and we have a lot of privilege here, and we have to teach against that it's not all about how big daddy's yacht is or what daddy's car looks like. It's about what you are as a person and what you give back and how you treat people. Yes, we have to work hard in that respect, but in terms of them understanding the importance of a multicultural society, I think Monaco pretty has that very, very well done.
But I mean, family values are so important to you. Just I've heard you talk about your mom and your dad and all of those things. And I think that's part of the reason you started Families on Track, I imagine, in 2019.
Absolutely. Actually born out of a race here in Monaco. So we took part in the, I guess it was the Monaco Run, and it was split into a relay, 3,000 meters and a 7,000 meter part of the 10K. And my friend was going to run it. And then Isla, who at the time was probably only about 7 or 8, maybe 9. She wanted to run a little bit. So she ran the first K or so and then handed over to my friend, who handed over to me. And at the finish, she was there and she said, you know what, this is great. I love doing this with you. We should do something like this. So I started to think, and I loved sharing running with my dad. I loved going for a run with my dad growing up. It brought the family together. My brother would come along. Even my mom would join in at some bits. And nothing I love more now than running with my kids. And so I started to think about how I could bring that to more people, to get them to understand the fun of running and kind of how it makes you feel alive, not about the competition or running the quickest time, but just about how it makes you feel. And I started out with an Ekiden typed idea where you run down the road and you accomplish 10K or a marathon distance. But for this case, it was going to be 10K. And then I thought, no, that's not really inclusive, because for the little kids, you can't leave them at some point along the road. So then we came up with the idea of Families on Track, which is essentially we have a family pit lane. And in that pit lane, your family has your little box and you decorate that and the family stays in that. And then we have a 250 meter loop, a 500 meter loop and a 750 meter loop out of that. and you add up to 10K as a family in whatever way you want. There are very few rules. We often have 2-3-year-olds that will start out running holding a parent's hand. They only get one ball at the end of it. And then they want to run the next one on their own because they realize they can see their parents the whole way around and it feels safer. And we don't have a winner. You complete 10K, everybody gets a medal, everybody gets their goodie bag. The idea is just that the family spends however long they spend having fun together, something quality time together, put the phones down other than to take pictures, and just to enjoy doing physical activity together. So we did it for the first time in Monaco in February. It was the day it poured with rain in February.
That. I think I sent you a message saying, I'm so sorry.
I know. So of the 39 teams that were entered, we had 19 only turned out. But we had such a great atmosphere, and I'm hugely grateful to them for coming. And let's hope we get better weather when we do it again.
Is this going to be an annual race then?
It is. And I now have the support and backing of the Cape Powers Foundation as well, in terms of being able to bring in the equipment and being able to put it on more often through the year. So we're looking at trying to do that. But I'm hugely grateful. I mean, everything that Cape Powers stood for in the community was about bringing the community together, getting active together, looking after all areas of the community. So the fact that they're working with us on this seems like a really, really good fit, and we're excited to kind of bring it more to Monaco. The first time we did it was in the UK.
Well, community to me is a word that I associate with you. You have been involved with Peace and Sport, the Animal Fund, No Finish Line. You're an ambassador to the Princess Charlene Foundation. I think that you, as much as you possibly can, give back to this community. Do you feel, because you are a world recognized name through athletics, that you have a responsibility that comes with that to give back?
I guess. I think it's more that I really feel like this community is my home. And it's somewhere that I moved to in 2004 off the back of Athens, essentially, where I didn't really feel comfortable in the UK. Not that I didn't feel at home, but I didn't feel comfortable there. And I came here, and I do feel comfortable here. I love it. And
you are saying that you didn't feel as an elite athlete, really, you felt it was time to leave your home country.
For a short period. Yeah. For a short period. I don't feel like that now, but I just feel like I'm happier here. At the time, I just felt like perhaps I'd let a lot of people down. I needed to not be everybody's focus. needed to not have people know who I was, and I could very much do that in Monaco then. And so I enjoyed that part of it. And then now it is like a village here as well. It's a small community. A lot of people give back to it. It's a transient community as well, but the small core that are here all the time is fairly small, and it's a nice, safe, friendly community that I really feel at home. I have a lot of great friends here. I have a lot of admiration for the way that they do a lot of things. Yeah, some things we can always change, but the main things are done very, very well here. It's a great place to bring up kids. And so, yeah, I want to give back. I want to give back to the sport of running as well. So it's not so much that I feel like I have a responsibility to. I feel like I want to give back and to support the community, to support athletics around the world. And I feel like I have a platform to be able to do that, perhaps more effectively than I could do if I didn't have that. So it's not the responsibility that comes with it. It's the, I guess, accessibility and the fact that it gives me a little bit greater a platform to be able to perhaps make a difference and to give back to the community and the sport that I love.
Because I would imagine that you get approached a lot to use your name in this way or to get something free or something like that. I was quite fascinated to see, and I hope that I've got this right, that you're designing bags for triathletes, something called the tote bricks.
Well, I'm working with the kit bricks, people who make some phenomenal pieces of kit from things that you store in the back of your
like bags
car,
you're talking about.
All sorts of, yeah, mostly storage bags and things like that, so that you can put together for expeditions or you can just put in the back of your car. And because I'm working with them, and then they asked me to collaborate with them on the tote bricks, which is essentially a tote, but it's great for sporting mums, for women who want to kind of go really seamlessly from having a nice bag and walking around to on the side of the sports field, and it's mud everywhere, and it's got a completely waterproof bottom cube, which is essentially the base of the kit bricks, and so you can set it down wherever. So, we work together on the tote brick so that you can find your keys quickly. When the phone's ringing, you know which pocket that's in. Your water bottle is held at the side. It's not going to tip and leak. There's a pocket for your computer. And the biggest thing and the best thing for me, when you're traveling, there's a little contraption or zips that help you to attach it to your carry-on. So when you let go of it, it doesn't tip over and your bag doesn't fall off and your things don't go all over the floor. So little things like that, they were just really keen to work with us on designing. And I thought it was quite cool. It was something that I've not really had the chance to do.
Have you ever done anything like that?
I've done it with shoes before.
Really? Did you design
Nike.
shoes?
Well, worked with the designers in terms of...
What did they ask you? Like, what were they looking for from your professional opinion?
The feel and the responsiveness of how it feels, kind of where you want the cushioning, where you don't want the cushioning, where it might rub, where it might not rub. But that was something that was really in my area. This was something that was fun to do.
So you said that the reason that you and your husband really came here was because, you needed a change from the UK and Monaco has given you something really unique. One of the things I remember you telling me about why Monaco is that the world has a really outside view, and looking in, they're always like, oh, it's just like, women who lunch, and, it's very stereotypical of how we see it. But something you told me once has stayed with me forever about why Monaco and what works for you for Monaco is how there's two communities here. Yeah,
I think there's two communities, and I think Monaco has a very, very strong sporting community. And of course, that goes to the prince and the princess as well, with their background. But the prince has always really, really supported sport. And I was spending a lot of time in the French Pyrenees at the high altitude training camp, where he had actually also been with the bobsleigh team.
Prince Albert?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And they remember him there, but they don't call him Prince Albert, they just call him Albert, which is not a disrespect thing in any way. It was just because he was just another sports person there. And I think that the community here really, really supports sporting people. And it's a great setup as well in terms of the kids. The school setup is a very, very high quality. And I've seen that it's tough at times for the kids, but it's a very, very high level of education. And I think we really loved it. We didn't know when we were coming in. We just knew it was very supportive of sport, and it was somewhere that we could get down to wherever we needed to for training. All of the training facilities here were very good. And then it really started to grow on us just how strong that community is here. Little things like I was pregnant with my daughter, and my competition name obviously is Paula Radcliffe. My married name is Loch, and that's what I am here, or Lau as they try and say it in French. But I went into the hospital, and I had been continuing to go to the athletics club and do my little bits of training there, and had a lot of support from the members of the athletics club. And so when I came to leave the hospital with Isla, they said to me, do you have another name? And I said, yes. And they said, we have a whole room of flowers and things for you. So they'd actually put me on a watch list, and they'd said to people within that community, when she comes in to give birth, let us know so then we can send some flowers or something like that. So yeah, it was really, really pretty and really nice that they had kind of done that and supported that. Another time I was actually doing some hill reps, and because I needed to stay hydrated while I was pregnant, I had put a water bottle on the top of my car, and I was running the hill reps, and I saw a gentleman walking, and he stopped and he stood by my car. So I came back and I said, can I help you? And he said, well, are you supposed to be doing that? Does your doctor know that you're doing that? And I said, yes, yeah, it's fine. It's okay. I mean, I was about 7.5 months pregnant. He said, well, if it's all okay with you, I'm just going to wait till you finish and make sure you're okay. So he just sat down and watched me do the training session, not to judge or criticize in any way, just in a kind, nice way, just to make sure that I was okay. And so I think that sense of community here, that children can just have a lot more freedom at a younger age because of the safety of the community here.
Well, I think I've known you now for about 10 years, and you, to me, represent a whole community of people here who are just living their lives, working, bringing up their kids. Women are off doing what they need to do. You're off doing you're designing bags, you're designing shoes, but there's a different quality of life than just married rich people here.
Exactly. There are so many people here trying to do the same. I mean, next May, I'm going to do a trek across the Icelandic glacier
What?
from Reykjavik. Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about it. But it's for Cancer Research UK. And then half of mine will also go to Children with Cancer because I'm a patron for them in the UK. But it's organised by Levmed. It's a company set up in Monaco. And it's really a way of trying to, again, give back and to make a difference. And there isn't enough that can ever be done to fight cancer. I know that. So many of us know that and have been touched by that in some way. So this is a group of people from here who have organised this trip themselves and are just doing it to raise money. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that in terms of I've never been. I would love to see the glacier before it goes. That's another area that I'm passionate about, is really trying to protect the erosion of the glaciers as well.
Wow.
But to at the same time get an opportunity to push myself probably out of my comfort zone, as a lot of other people are doing, but to make a difference and to raise some money for charity as well.
Well, seeing as you speak French so fluently, I'm sure Monaco Info will be following that and doing a report, Paula. So thank you so much for being, as I said, our first female guest on the Monaco Info podcast series in English.
Thank you.